Okay. Well, thank you for showing up. Appreciate it. Um, so yeah, we are this week. We're kind of moving into a section on. Some people make the division between. By some people, I mean not me, but other academics make a distinction between Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. It's just philosophy. It's all talking about the same thing, speculating about the nature of reality, the soul, mind, God, just philosophy. But this week we're going to cover kind of geographically. This week we're going to cover Indian philosophy, Hindu philosophy. After this, we're going to cover the two kind of classic schools of Chinese philosophy. Confucianism and Taoism are kind of the classic, kind of the core bedrock of the Chinese philosophical foundations. And then we're going to talk about Buddhism, which is a newer development in a new religion and new philosophical school that develops in the Asiatic area. But with respect, maybe I should put up a map or whatever, but you all know where India's at, right? The Indian subcontinent, right? So Hinduism is the school of thought, and Hinduism is, of course, a Western word that we describe. You here for philosophy? Yeah, sorry, come on in. Had a little bit of a last minute room change, so yeah. So Hinduism is a Western term that Westerners use to describe the both religious and philosophical traditions and practices of India that have been there for like 3,500 years, a really, really long time. And so we're going to not even scratch the surface of all of that today. It's a very long, very deep, old tradition. So this is really just to spark your interest. And of course, since this is a philosophy class, we're focusing more on the big picture philosophical ideas rather than the religious aspect of it. But I also want to be clear: there's no real separation. Okay, especially for the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Confucian and Taoist tradition. Um, we as Westerners, I'm assuming, like to draw a distinction between philosophy, religion, science, religion, everything else, religion, right? We like to church and state, right? We like to keep those things separate, kind of built into the American fabric and ethos. It's not the case for the Indian tradition, the Chinese tradition, right? They're all kind of interwoven together. Does that make sense? So good. Let's talk. I'm gonna use some Western philosophical terms to kind of introduce this concept. So terms that you might be familiar with. Real quick. Here for philosophy. Sorry, we got locked down. Come on, man. Had to switch rooms last minute. So some of these terms may or may not be familiar with, hopefully, from the first week. So let's start off with the first one. Metaphysics. Anybody remember week one? What is metaphysics? So we got this word. You know what that is, right? What is physics? You still probably had taken a physics class. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I took physics. Well, I mean, has to do like the movement, like objects,
Yeah.
Newton's laws and force stuff.
Right. Yeah, nowadays physics is just a bunch of math. A lot of equations, but motion, force, movement of the planets, all that good stuff, that's physics. So metaphysics is coming from the Greek meta, meaning after. Aristotle's the first person to write a book on metaphysics. Is for Aristotle what came after his lectures on physics. But metaphysics in philosophy, as a school of as a branch of philosophy, seeks to answer a simple but one of those simple but weird questions: what is real? What is reality? at its most fundamental, basic level, what is real? So keep this in mind, because most of what we're talking about with respect to Indian philosophy, most of this is going to be metaphysics. So metaphysics asks the question, what is real? Now, in the ancient world, metaphysics was closely related to, this is, you may have also taken a class on this, you can take a class on this today, cosmology. Anybody know what cosmology is? It's related to physics.
Isn't it like space?
Yeah, the cosmos, the universe, space, planets, black holes, suns, stars, all that good stuff, right? That's cosmology nowadays. So if you were to take a cosmology class at Georgia Southern, what you would learn about is like gravity. You would learn about like formations of galaxies and solar systems, right? And all the mathematics behind that. In the ancient world, it's a bit more broad, and cosmology includes things like the sun and the moon and the planets and the movements of all of those bodies, yes, but it also includes things that would not be in a modern cosmology class, things like God, angels, spirits, right? Because it's talking about the universe, broadly speaking, and everything that's in the universe, entities that inhabit the universe. Now, of course, we inhabit the universe and we'd be a part of that, but in ancient times, those entities included things that you would not find in a science class here at Georgia Southern, right? Because again, today we separate. Back then, they didn't. You follow me so far? Does that make sense? Okay. I have for number 3, system building. Another term for this might be worldview. Anybody ever heard that expression before? What does it mean to develop a worldview, to build a system with respect to metaphysics? If I were to ask you, what's your name?
Yeah.
Yeva? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you're going to
So
answer.
maybe system building is like developing, for example, like religion helps to answer those metaphysical questions, right?
Mhm.
Like why,
Yeah,
how, like how world was created, for example. So,
right, right. So it's addressing the metaphysical questions. It's asking these big metaphysical questions. How was the world created? How was the universe created? With system building and world building, it's also trying to figure out how all of your metaphysical thoughts and ideas and opinions fit together. So if I were to ask you, what is your worldview? It's kind of like the guiding principle, philosophy, set of beliefs that you govern your life by. And part of that would be ethics. Hello, come on in, here for philosophy.
yes.
All right, have a seat. So part of that would be like very practical things, like how you run your day-to-day life, how you decide, like you just had your first exam on ethics, right? How you answer some of those basic questions, like would you ever murder somebody? I have to put that on there because that's what everybody wants to talk about for some reason. Do you shop local or do you shop at big chains? Do you eat meat? Right? So those are practical, everyday questions. But a worldview system building would take that, and it would also take questions like, where did the universe come from? Do spirits exist? Do supernatural entities exist? All of that taken together, if you were to map that out for yourself, it would be system building. And especially a lot of ancient philosophy, we get these big systems that are built, trying to figure out how all of this, which we'll talk about here shortly, how all of this fits together, how all of it ties together. Does that make sense? Questions about that? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'll say this.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So I mentioned at the start of this that Hindu thought is really, really, really old, 3,500 years old. Most of you may, anybody familiar with Hinduism? Just out of curiosity. You've heard of it a little bit? Have all of you heard of like Christianity? Probably. You're here in the United States, right? There's like 500 churches here in Statesboro. You've probably at least heard of it, even if you haven't been to one of them. Right? So just like there are 500 Christian churches here in Statesboro, there are a lot of different Hindu temples and denominations that exist. So take this as take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because what I'm conveying to you is a particular branch of Hinduism. In the same way that somebody might talk to you about like Catholicism, a particular branch of Christianity. What I'm presenting is a particular branch of Hinduism called Vaishnavism. FYI. Contemporary forms of Vaishnavism include the Hare Krishna tradition. I am just internet friends with some Hindu scholars, and this is the tradition that they come from, and those are the people I get to ask questions to, so that's the literature that I read. Okay, so I say all that to say that if you leave here tonight and you go and maybe you talk to your friend who's a Hindu and you start throwing terms at them like Maya and Samsara, they might give you a blank look. Probably not. But just like if you go and talk to a Christian about like who the author of the four gospels are, they might be like, I just go to church on Sundays. Right? Similar sort of thing might happen, just as a fair warning. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get into some of the metaphysical stuff. So metaphysics, again, asks that question, what's real? What is reality like at its most basic, fundamental level? You got two schools of thought that answer this question with respect to substance. What exists, what doesn't exist. So we know that something exists because we're all here. But what is that thing? Again, that's the most basic level. So in philosophy, we got kind of two general answers to that. One is monism and dualism. So monism says that reality, all of reality, is the same thing. The same, consists of the same stuff. Now, what that stuff is, well, that's where the debates start to happen, right? Because what would physics say that stuff is? Atoms?
Well, on the other hand, we go to dualism in physics, like matter and antimatter, right?
Okay.
So
Matter, antimatter. Okay, get a little bit more complicated here. Yeah, subatomic particles, right? If you get into quantum mechanics, you want to do big picture relativity, fields, gravity, that sort of thing, right? That's somebody else, maybe. Here for philosophy?
Yes.
Sorry, we had to switch rooms. Come
Okay,
on.
cool.
All right, so monism says that reality consists, that all of reality, me, you, these tables, this whiteboard, the universe as a whole, consists of the same thing, the same stuff, the same substance. Okay, so keep that in mind on one hand. On the other hand, you have dualism. So you said in physics, you have a dualism of matter, antimatter. In philosophy, dualism says that reality, if monism is reality is one thing, dualism is reality is two things, two basic things. Then we get more and more categories added on to that. Yeah. Now, not knowing anything about dualism, so if I say I'm a monist, reality is just material existence. What do you think dualism would be then?
what we can't see.
Okay, Yeah, what we can't see, which would be what? Air, okay. But I could say that air has like particle. I don't know anything about science. That's why I'm teaching philosophy, but particles and stuff, right? Waves, maybe. Okay. Y'all are still thinking too scientific.
So,
Okay.
something that we can just imagine. Love.
Whoa, okay. Well, it is in the air. It's almost Valentine's Day, right? Yeah. So, but even then, I can maybe describe love as a biochemical process in the brain. That's the lame view of love, though, right? We want to. That's not what gets people to write poetry. And when I was at Georgia Southern, that's not what got me to drive back to Savannah an hour and a half every single day because I was in love. Right? Don't fall. You know what I'm talking about. So dualism usually says that reality is, we have two basic categories: material reality, physical world, right? And then the spiritual world. Or if you don't want to go spiritual, a lot of dualists would say you have matter and consciousness. That consciousness is a fundamental thing of existence, of reality, that can't be reduced to purely chemical, physical processes. Does that make sense? You don't have to accept it. You follow me. All right. This is where it's going to get a little weird. Just bear with me here. Hindu philosophy is going to be monistic, but it's going to say that the fundamental building blocks, the fundamental substance, basis of reality is divine. Okay? We all on the same page?
Can you say that again? Yeah.
That the fundamental substance of reality is divine. For lack of a better word, is spiritual. We'll talk about what that spiritual thing is here in a second. So, as a system of thought, Hinduism is also going to appeal to what philosophers would call phenomenology, which is your basic everyday experience. And it's going to try to appeal to that experience as something that you're somewhat familiar with. And it's going to say that you, at some point in your life, you can tell me if this is true or not. We got two kind of pooling factors here. So on the one hand, we have this fundamental sense of dissatisfaction or illusionment with your life, with reality. Now, you are all still very young, younger than me anyway. So maybe you haven't reached this point yet. But at some point in people's life, we start to ask questions like, this it? Is that everything? Is it just work and school and taking care of my kids and driving an hour every day? Is that it? So that's the one hand that Hinduism says you're going to ask yourself. Maybe not now, maybe not even in this lifetime, but eventually you're going to reach this point where you start to ask those sorts of questions. Then we have this other thing, this other feeling that we experience, which is this feeling of the fundamental interconnectedness that we have, typically with people. The sense of underlying unity, underlying humaneness that we share. Again, mostly with people, but maybe you don't like people. Maybe you feel that way towards your dog, right? Sense of connection. So we have these two things. And Hindu philosophy, I should say, is going to give us an answer to why that is. The answer to the first question, the sense of disillusionment with life is that your life as you know it. Now, I used to reference the Matrix here. Has anybody actually seen the Matrix? You have? Wow. Dang. Okay. I mean, I was watching the Matrix in high school. That's why I asked. I was trying to find another more contemporary example. But Hinduism says your life as you know it and as you experience it, there's a level of illusion to it. That what you're seeing and what you're experiencing is just the surface level. And it's going to invite you to go a little deeper, to take the, what is it, the red pill or the blue? Take the red pill to see through that illusion. And when you see through that illusion, what are you going to see? Going back to that other factor, you're going to see this fundamental underlying unity of all things and all people. Not to get too preachy, but does that make sense? I'm not trying to preach, by the way. Questions about that before we go on? It's only going to get weirder from here on out. So, okay. All right. So yeah, we got this distinction between monism and dualism. Now let's talk about Brahman. But before we talk about Brahman, let me ask you this question. Speaking of preachy, and I'll ask for some volunteers, but you know, we're just going straight to the big topics here tonight because it's the only like in-person thing we're going to do. What is God? Or how would you describe God? Let's go with more of a subjective bent to it. How would you describe God? Any volunteers? Huh?
Our creator.
Creator. Okay. That's a good one. Who else? Throw out some adjectives. And it doesn't have to be you personally. Maybe your family member, or you took an intro to religion class or something. Faith? Okay. And like faith in God? All right.
Something divine.
Divine, as opposed to the natural, the not divine. Me, right? You, not y'all are more divine than me. How else would you describe God? Anybody else want to jump in there? Get weird with it. It's okay. It's a philosophy class. How would you describe God?
Our creator. I don't.
Okay, creator. Are you having a hard time describing God?
No, I don't do well with like.
I'm sorry, I put you
No,
on the
it's not.
spot.
I
It's
don't
okay.
like being on the spot.
It's okay.
Sorry.
How would you describe God?
See, it's hard.
Yeah, sorry. What'd you say?
He named the three top ones. Faith,
Okay.
higher power.
Higher power. Okay. Associated typically with something like spiritual, I think somebody said. We might have a hard time describing God because in a lot of different traditions, they would say that God is ineffable. God's undescribable. In the Jewish tradition, you're not even supposed to write the name of God because by writing the name of God, you are limiting God. You're putting God into a box with some words, and God doesn't fit well into boxes. Right? How would you describe that? Call them everybody.
Probably said all powerful.
All powerful, right? We get the omnis, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipotent. Omnipotent is all powerful, omnipresent being everywhere, omnipotent, knowing everything. What about you?
I don't know. Father figure, provider.
Okay. Provider, answering prayers, the source of the faith. Yeah. So I bring that up, and thank you all for sharing. I bring that up because in Indian philosophy, you have this concept of Brahman. This is where it gets tricky because when you think of Hinduism and you think of the god of Hinduism, what do you think of? Huh? Nothing?
I don't know, I might be wrong, but I think they have some, like some specific name.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
You're gonna say something?
Me?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask if Hinduism has like multiple gods.
Yeah, lots of names. Lots of gods. Yes.
I don't, if it's Hinduism, Krishna.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
That's Hinduism. Gods, goddesses, yes. You're gonna add something?
No.
Okay.
Which one is Allah?
That's Islam. Yeah. Mhm. It's okay. It's all good. No, yeah, religion's confusing. So, I think that's a safe comment to make. So when people think of Hinduism, they typically think of what we'd say like polytheism, right? So in the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, you got Yahweh in Judaism, Jesus in Christianity, and Allah in Islam, right? Just monotheism, mono meaning one. Well, in Hinduism, there's literally thousands of different gods and goddesses that have been around for thousands of years. In some of these traditions, Brahman is viewed as a god, described in similar ways that you all have described God. The problem with that is in the more philosophical text, in Hinduism, these are called the Vedas, and a part of the Vedas called the Upanishads. I have a video kind of breaking down the holy text of Hinduism if you're interested. So Brahman is a god in the same way that Krishna is a god in Hinduism. But Brahman is also, going back to here, in the Indian philosophical traditions, Brahman is also the grounding, the substance of reality. Brahman is ultimate reality, is the ultimate source of being. Okay? So you can think of Brahman as, this will be our grounding of everything that is. Brahman persists, exists through everything. Everything at its most basic level is composed of Brahman. From the planets, to you, to me, to the desk, to the earth, everything that exists is Brahman. I know we got a little out there, but you still follow me? So this is how it's different from those monotheistic traditions that we talked about. So a lot of you mentioned God the creator. God creates. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So in the monotheistic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, you have this picture of creation. The G is God. God creates, we can call this the universe, the world, everything. In the beginning, God creates everything. And so and this is just a picture, right? So don't quote me as like a theologian or something. But the idea here is that God exists apart from, separate from creation, right? In the beginning, God created implies that what? God was there before she created, right? And that creation exists apart from, separate from God. So we could turn that into a math equation for some reason. I don't know why, but we could say like God minus the universe. What do you got? God's still there, right? God isn't in the monotheistic traditions. God isn't dependent upon the universe for God's existence. Taking away the universe doesn't diminish God in any way. It's still God. He just created again if God wants to. Right? That's the idea anyway. in this view, it's God and the universe are inseparable. Okay? And even this word God doesn't, you're going to have problems applying it to Brahman in that regard. Brahman is everything that has existed, will exist, doesn't exist. Right? The entirety of things and non-things, matter and antimatter, all of it consists of Brahman. Does that make sense? This is getting into the system building that we were talking about before. Okay. Now, the weird thing about the universe is that the universe has things that reflect on the universe. Us. Right? What Hinduism says about human beings, not just human beings, but all living creatures, going back to that sense of illusionment that we might feel and to that sense of unity, is that all of us are individual manifestations of Brahman. This is all of us. Because I can't draw very well, right? All of us are individual manifestations of Brahman. That individual manifestation is called Atman. I'm just going to draw A's on there. Now, this is also where it can get a little confusing because I asked you with respect to Brahman this question, what is God? I'm going to ask you another weird question. What is the soul? You've heard of people talk about souls before, right? I'm gonna call on you. I'm sorry, put you on the spot. If a little kid were to come up to you and say, "Tell me your name,"
Shayla.
Shayla, you get like the 2-year-old that likes to ask questions. Shayla, what's a soul?
Your spirit.
Okay.
It's not.
Spirit, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
A good place to start.
Not a physical thing.
Not a physical thing. Spiritual in nature. What else? Somebody else add to the Shayla's description of the soul as a spirit. What would you say the soul is? Looks like you want to answer. Am I wrong?
This is maybe our essence.
Okay. Our essence. I like that. That's what Aristotle would say that the soul is. I know you were reading Aristotle. That's why you said it. No. Let me ask a related question, because this is a big question that all of us have to wrestle or cope with, since we're asking all the big questions tonight. What happened? I'm not asking you personally, although feel free to philosophize on this. But with respect to the question of the soul, what happens after we die? What do people typically say? Anyway.
Your soul either goes to heaven or hell.
Your soul goes to heaven or hell, right? We're in the South, in the United States. That's a predominantly Christian view, right? What were you going to say?
No, yeah, I was going to say.
Okay. What else do we say about souls and death?
If you have unfinished business, then your soul wanders.
All right. Is that a Casper reference? You know what I'm talking about? Isn't that, yeah. There was a show back in the day called Casper the Friendly Ghost. And that's what Casper said, if you have unfinished business, that's why you. I mean, it's a good answer. I liked it as a kid. So we have this idea that souls are things that survive death. If we think of souls as essences, as your spirit, your soul is typically conceived of as that which is most you, right? Whatever that you is. You are your soul first and foremost, and then like your body secondly, so that you survive your bodily death, right? You've heard this before, I assume. Unless like one of you grew up like on an island somewhere. This is like your first time in the United States, maybe, from a non-Christian nation or something. I don't know. Right, so we have this idea of souls as things that survive death. This is a similar idea to the Atman, but it's slightly different, right? Because how do we think of the afterlife? I mean, I can tell you how the afterlife was described to me as a kid, but I want to hear, how was it described to you? What sorts of things happen in the afterlife? What are you doing in the afterlife? Go ahead. Saw you thinking about it.
If you go to heaven, you basically live in lavish, and if you go to hell, you just burn forever.
Yeah, let's not talk about the hell part. Right? That's the depressing part. Tell me more about this heaven thing, right? What's the soul like in heaven? Like, what is the soul doing in heaven?
I don't really know.
Don't know. What's the popular conception of heaven?
People that, are there.
Yeah.
They're solid.
Right. You go to see your loved ones that have passed. You have like this big family reunion. Some people like go as far as to say like your old pets are there. That's nice. Right? But the idea is that since you are your soul, that part of your personality, part of what makes you you is surviving that transition from this life to the afterlife. So some people will describe the Atman, the closest English word that we have is soul, but that view of soul as what's really you, as aspects of your personality, doesn't quite get at that. Because the Atman, at its most basic level, is what? Brahman. Okay? The Atman, like, if I were to ask you to describe yourself, maybe you tell me about, like, if you have good taste, like your favorite style of pizzas, New York pizza, you shop at, I don't know. I don't have fashion taste, obviously, right? But you might say like where your favorite place to shop's at, what your favorite kind of music is. Maybe you get a little bit into your personality. Maybe you're a little, let's say, a clean freak. Maybe you're more type B type of person. Maybe you're Myers-Briggs personality type. That's when we describe ourselves. We talk about the soul. When we say that we recognize people in heaven that have gone on before us, the assumption there is that part of us is making that transition, and that the soul in that way is us, right? But for the Atman, the focus is not on you and your quirkiness, and your likes and dislikes. The focus is on Brahman. So the soul, the Atman, is what survives death, yes, but it's not like you. Yeah.
So Atman would be like a drop in the ocean, right?
Yes. That's the metaphor that's used. Yeah. Yes. Your Hindu philosophy. So the analogy that's given in the Upanishads is that the Atman is like a river that runs into the ocean. Brahman's the ocean. So all Atmans go back to the ocean. But once the river goes into the ocean, it's no longer a river. It's just part of the ocean. Does that metaphor help? So it is a soul, yes. It does survive death, yes. But it's not going to be like your personality is not what's surviving. Because your personality is not really what matters here. sure you're a great person. But in terms of this, that's not what matters. Does that make sense? Okay. So you got Brahman, which is the fundamental basis of reality. You got Atman, which is the individualization of the Brahman. Now we have this idea of Maya, samsara. So I said before that we have this notion of reality, of your life being an illusion. What's the illusion? The illusion that we all live with on a daily basis is that you and I are separate people, that all of us are separate people. The reality is that we're all share this fundamental unity. Okay? Maya is that illusion. Because what does that illusion lead to? If I saw you and I as ultimately one, how would that impact like how I treated you, for example? Ethics. How might that impact ethics? Versus if I saw you as a different person.
Like you will harm someone if you think if you want, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of expressed in different ways and different traditions, but you've heard of the golden rule before. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Same sort of idea. I'm going to feed myself. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm looking out for number one ultimately. But if I don't see a distinction, am I going to like flip you off when I pass you in traffic? Sorry. If you like cut me off in traffic, am I going to start like shooting you a bird? No. It's like, oh, I'll make mistakes, right? I'm going to give you the same sort of leniency I give myself because ultimately we're connected. But, of course, we don't always live our lives like that, right? We get mad in traffic. We get mad at our boss because they didn't give us a raise or give us the weekend off like we wanted to. We get mad at our professors because they failed us for that assignment. I don't think I've failed any of you. Oh, you don't have to bust yourself up. We get mad at our professors when they don't grade our exams on time, right? It's hard. It's easy, I should say. It's easy to get caught up in not realizing that connection. And so that getting caught up, getting bogged down is ultimately getting caught in that illusion being Maya. At a larger level, we have this cycle that's presented to us. And this is a cycle, something else that you may have heard of with respect to Hinduism. This is the cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth. Hinduism presents this cyclical nature of reality. We're born, we live our lives, we grow old, hopefully, we die. But remember, the Atman continues on. The Atman doesn't die. And ultimately, the Atman is reborn again to go through this cycle. But this cycle, on the whole, this might sound a little pessimistic, right? But ultimately, life is more painful than it is pleasurable, right? I don't really know any of you, but I'm sure if I got to know you, you would tell me that your lives have been marked by probably multiple, hopefully not, tragic events. Most of us define ourselves by where we come from, what we've lived through, what we've survived, right? That becomes our narrative, our life story. Life as a whole for Hinduism is constantly filled with temptation with setback, with pain, because that's what life is. Even if you imagine your best life, your perfect life, you become a nurse, you do some travel assignments, you make killer money, find a wonderful partner, have this awesome house in the countryside. Even if we go all the way down that route, what is that ultimately going to end in? You're going to keep that house? You're going to keep that job? Your partner may not always stay with you. They might leave you voluntarily, involuntarily. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we get sick, we grow old, we die. And dying is inherently painful. We were speaking before. My wife was a hospice nurse, right? It's not pretty. I can tell you that. We romanticize the act of dying, but for the person experiencing it, it's physically painful. For the family, it's inherently tragic. People don't always leave wills, so there's bickering and fighting, and it's nasty and it's ugly. Usually. Hopefully it won't be for you, right? But this cycle is ultimately not what we want. That's not the end game, not the end goal. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So the cycle of birth, life, death is samsara. That cyclical process. Now you've heard of this before, right? Somebody tell me, what's karma? How have you heard it explained?
You do something bad.
Yeah. I do a bad action. I flip you off in traffic. I don't know why I'm going with that. You're up here smiling. I'm just thinking about road rage. You do something bad's going to happen to you. You've heard what goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. Right? If you go around treating other people, if you're an asshole to everybody, somebody's going to be an asshole back to you. Likewise, on the other hand, if you're kind to people, people return kindness with kindness. Right? This is the basic idea of karma that most of us have heard of before, right? Karma in this system, so remember the Atman is journeying through samsara. You can think of karma, bad karma anyway, as what gets stuck to the Atman. And bad karma is what's keeping us in Maya. Bad karma is what's tying us down to the dirty, nasty, brutish side of life. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Is that whatever, like, doing stuff like that, having a bad karma, like you're being incarnated like on a different level?
Yes, exactly. You're already ahead of the game. Yes. So the idea is with this life, birth, death cycle, good karma, and this is in some branches of Hinduism, but if you look at like, well, I was going to say Tibetan Buddhism, but that's not Hinduism, but good karma typically gets you reincarnated. In ancient Hinduism, they had the caste system, which is how their society was organized. So in ancient Hinduism, they don't have a caste system anymore, but in ancient Hinduism, good karma would send you up that caste ladder. Bad karma, likewise, sending you down. There are Hindu versions of heavens and hells, plural, right? So bad karma, and in Buddhism, sends you further and further down into hells, place you don't want to be. And the more bad karma you got, just like with life, the further and further down you get into that path of greed, of violence, of anger, the harder it is to get out. But on a cosmic scale. You're absolutely right, though. Thank you. Which relates to reincarnation, right? That's the being born again, the Atman, being born again. But ultimately, and this is where we'll end, ultimately, we don't want to stay here, right? We don't want to stay in samsara. We want to break out. And the breaking of the cycle, the ending of the cycle, is moksha. Moksha is release. It's the ending of bondage. It's the breaking of chains. We're no longer tied to samsara. But without me explicitly telling you, what do you think the goal of moksha is? What are we ultimately trying to get back to? Peace in the form of, right? Brahman, reuniting with Brahman is ultimate peace. It's the ending of suffering. It's the heaven, for lack of a better word, but it's not like the heaven where you're reunited with old family members. It's the river that empties into the ocean. Yes.
So that Hinduism provides like an answer of what's the point of Atman and all and the life and itself, because if the goal is, so it was like the end point is the same as the beginning, right?
Yes.
So does Hinduism provide an answer to that? It basically was the meaning of life, right?
Right, right. The short answer to that is I don't know. Some explanations I have heard. This cycle of samsara doesn't necessarily have a beginning. It just kind of always was in one form or another. Now, some schools of Hindu thought would say that human beings began at a certain time and life in general began at a certain time, but this process of samsara has kind of always been there. And even in some branches, the gods and goddesses can also be part of this cycle. They're not necessarily immune to it. Right? So in terms of like, I guess the non-answer to your question would be that samsara is just always there. Right? So the goal, if the Atman ultimately comes from Brahman, it does seem cyclical because it is. It's a wanting to get back. It's that missing piece, wanting to return to the whole. Does that not answer your question or kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Other questions there? All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. I'm going to end the recording there.